Good evening, this is Gloria Taylor Brown. I want to welcome you to the 4th edition of Stepping Into Ourselves, a gathering of priestesses. And we have with us tonight two absolutely incredible women that I'm so delighted that you could come and hear them speak and see them. Rachel Koenig, I actually have a friend named that, so I shouldn't miss it, is a practitioner of Oriental medicine, and she specializes in holistic women's health. She has a clinic in Brooklyn. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And I just found out she lives out beyond the far Rockaways, which means something to somebody. I'm in Oceanside, California, so I'm a long way from there. No, actually, I know where it is. She's been, she also just shared with us that she has a novel that she's just finishing, which is set in Prague. That could be very interesting. Thank you, Rachel. I really appreciate your being here. In addition, we have Rabbi Jill Hammer, who is the Director of Spiritual Education at the Academy for Jewish Religion and the co-founder of the Kohenet Institute, a program in women's spiritual leadership. And she's also the author of 3 books, Sisters at Sinai, the Jewish Book of Days, and the Omer Calendar of Biblical Women. He goes on and on and on. She's really, you just need to find more. I'll give you some links later on, and you can find out more about both these women. They're just so incredible. This is probably the most excited I have been about any show since we started. And not to belittle anybody else, but the truth is you two are 2 of my favorites, at least this so far. So, and I want to really thank everybody who has come and played with me, because, you know, it's been a process, and I did send out an email saying, hey, you know, it wasn't so good last time, and I know that you understand that technology is technology, and sometimes it sucks. So, but anyway, I'd like to start with, and our question we always start with is, what drew you to the path of a priestess? And in Rabbi Hammer's question, what drew you the path of being a rabbi? I mean, that's a long process. Rachel, would you like to begin?
Sure. I was brought onto the priestess path. It started with my connection to astrology. I actually came upon through a very dear friend, the work of Andrea Goodman, who's also a priestess in the ministry that I'm involved in, of women in the ministry of Mahat. And you saw our Reverend Mother Ione the other night. And I began a study of Mythic astrology with Andrea Goodman. My own father was a dentist and an astrologer. So I've always been a great lover of astrology, and it has guided my life in many ways. And there always in my family was these 2 streams of esotericism and also science and medicine and creativity. So my parents had a mixed marriage. So my mother's actually Jewish. My father was a Jesuit Catholic. So their marriage was a real bridging of so many things. And so I'm a product of that, and somehow had a sort of like mind to my father of loving symbolic thinking. And so I had studied astrology with him and with several other people, but then I had a reading with Andrea, and it was very moving to me that she was using the system of the ancient sky, where we were looking at the fixed stars, not just the planets themselves, but the stars that if we were to look up at the moment someone was born, we would be able to actually see. And so I asked her if I could apprentice her in the Mythic astrology, because I was so moved by her interpretation of my chart, which I had heard many different ways. My own father does a form of astrology called prenatal astrology, where he believes the moment of conception is more the moment of a person's coming into their star energy. So this was a completely different interpretation altogether of my chart, but I found it just very, very moving and deep. So I began to travel to Andrea regularly, and we began to work deeply with astrology. And eventually, just being near her in that kind of way of being quickened, she was holding for me the living priestess, the living life of a priestess, and the mentorship from a priestess. And it brought me, after having had so many apprenticeships with men, actually, my medicine teachers had mainly been male, into a sort of awakening of being able to work from a deeper earth-based, more female place inside myself. And she eventually brought me into her circles in the ministry, and I began to circle with Ione and many beautiful women of every tradition and of every kind of expression of their priestessing. And I think that's one of the beautiful discoveries for me, was that I was brought into a women's circle where we were each sort of allowed the space to express our female being in our own unique way. There were no rules, and people were coming in and out of circles. Some people had been coming for years before I even showed up. Some people come for the first time and then we don't see them again. But over the years, we've become, I believe we're over 30 women now, each in our own sort of satellite, you could say, of the larger group, and including a prayer circle online. And so suddenly this sort of support of the fabric of a life of being, circling regularly throughout the year, traveling together, that's a big part of our work together, that we make sacred journeys, connecting to different land, and of course through Andrea's teachings, connecting to the sky with each retreat that we do. And we also work with sound. We work with, all of the different netters and netterus. We work with, we worked also with very deep Jewish spirituality, depending on which women are present, to sort of co-teach. So it just was a very spacious coming into, and also just a quickening, I believe, by just being, in the presence of these very evolved women. And then it began to sort of filter into my medical work with people, and now it's not unusual to be working with a woman at various stages of life, whether it's wanting to have a child or just having had a child, or going through menopause, or needing help with creative support, or going through divorce or any kind of life change, to be able to offer them entree to, be able to process themselves inside a group of women who are mature and compassionate. And so that's been also something that's been very integrated into my daily life as a physician.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for that. And now, let's see, I have to change this. How do I do that? It requires me to change the presenter in order to make sure that I get the right person recorded here. So give me just a second to master the technology. There you go. All right, so Rabbi Hammer, tell us how you came into this path.
Well, it's really been a lifelong journey, so I'll just hit some highlights. Right now, we're finishing the book, The Hebrew Priestess, which is going to be a documentation of the Kohenet Hebrew Priestess Institute's work. And so in the introduction, I had to tell this story. And really, I began my life very, very interested in Judaism and in the Bible. And at the same time, I was reading a lot of myth. My parents knew I loved fairy tales and mythology, and they bought me all kinds of books from all kinds of cultures. And so, of course, that influenced me and allowed me to think about symbols in a broader way. And I remember seeing the tarot card, the High Priestess, for the first time, and being very torn, because on the one hand I was working within a tradition that wasn't happy about images, and on the other hand this image was so powerful to me, and there's something about that tension has remained in my life. I was always very connected to the moon, to the seasons. Those things were important to me, and I was a text head, so I was constantly balancing between these things. When I got to college, I began to have a lifelong interest in Jewish feminist poetry and ritual. That had a big influence on me. I was reading Rachel Adler and Judith Plasko and other Jewish women who were really not on a priestess path, but who were working in the area of women's spirituality. And then, you know, under my pillow, I was hiding Starhawk, you know, and I was reading the pagan feminists, so I wasn't supposed to be reading, but I wanted to know what they were saying. And at a certain point, I had decided to be a psychologist. I was in graduate school, but I was doing a lot of circling with women and a lot of work with spirituality. And at a certain point, I had a dream. And in my dream, God came to a cocktail party. I was at a cocktail party, and God was the guest of honor. And when God came in, God was an enormous pregnant woman. Glowing, golden, pregnant woman. And I was quite surprised to discover that all the images I'd been reading in feminist poetry had suddenly come to life, you know, and there she was. And I talked to her, and she gave me this fabulous lantern. And, you know, when I woke up, I couldn't remember what the lantern was for. So I feel like my whole quest has been to find out what the lantern is for. And the next day, I got an application to rabbinical school, which was what I knew about how to be a priestess, was I was going to be a rabbi. And I went to rabbinical school and promptly became radicalized, because the text that I was reading and the culture that I was studying was fabulous. It was magnificent. It was interesting. It was engaging. It was deep. And a lot of it was not women-centered, to say it politely. You know, it was really very painful. And so my response to that, first I was in a fighting mode. You know, I was going to argue with everybody. And then when I was done arguing with everybody, I thought, well, I have to fix this for myself. Right? You know, something is broken here that needs to be whole. And I began to read about priestesses. I began to read about women in the ancient Near East. I began to see that Jewish women and Israelite women were doing things exactly the way that priestesses were doing them in other cultures. The way that I'd been educated told me to think of these two women in two separate groups, but they weren't in two separate groups. And once I began to see that, I began to understand what was possible. That I could live my life in the lineage of these women. That I didn't have to imagine that Jewish women's leadership began in 1973. You know, that just wasn't true. And I mean, that's the myth, right? Oh, it was men, and then all of a sudden these, you know, women suddenly, you know, popped up and wanted to be rabbis. You know, but in fact, we have a 5,000-year-old tradition of spiritual leadership, and it belongs to us. And so I was on a quest to figure this out. And then I met Taya Shere, who is my co-leader in the Kohenet Hebrew Priestess Institute. And within 24 hours of meeting each other, we said, we have to do this. We have to bring this tradition into the present. It can't be a historical artifact. We have to make it real. Right? If the rabbinate is real in the present, if Judaism is real in the present, this can be real in the present. And so we got together at a Jewish retreat center with 20 other women, and we said, we're going to do this. We're going to figure out how to be Hebrew priestesses. Now it's 8 years later. We're on our 5th class. Our program is growing, and I am a very happy Jewish priestess.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much. And, you know, it's interesting that the two of you, although you've come from different paths, have in many ways sort of, you know, it's been like a twining. And that's what I find happens with everyone that I talk with, is that, you know, it's not like, you know, you just woke up one day and decided, oh, well, I guess I should be a priestess. But it's like there's these pieces, and it comes together like a mosaic, and after a while you begin to realize that it's a gorgeous, incredible mosaic ball of all these different pieces, and when the light hits one aspect, it shoots off, you know, the Jewish traditional background, and whenever it hits another aspect, it hits the astrology, and another aspect, it hits the pagan, and but they're all part of the same thing. It all one. And my experience has been, you know, I've always I come from a Baptist tradition, so don't even think I had anything to do with the Jewish tradition. Start growing up. I declared myself a witch whenever I was 14 years old and almost got thrown out of school. But I was lucky enough to have a mentor when I was 18 who was a Jewish woman who lived on the Upper East Side, who introduced me to some of the most fabulous, incredible people at that time, including several rabbis who were men who found out I liked to read and I had a brain, and assigned me, I guess you would say, books to read so that I could discuss with them whenever I came back to New York the next time. At that point, I was going about once a month. And so I became fascinated with the whole, it was like there was this whole body of knowledge out there that nobody had ever told me existed. And so I became fascinated with it, and over a period of 15 or 20 years, you know, spent a lot more time reading the Talmud and the Jewish version of the Bible. And I at one point wanted to learn how to speak Hebrew. That was a total failure. But I was fascinated by the glyphs. And I also have been fascinated by Egypt since I was 5 years old. And I could see in the glyphs, it was like there's part there that there was a relationship to the hieroglyphs. And so that fascinated me, and fascinated how it worked together and how that tradition could be carried from one place to another in almost keeping it intact. I mean, there's some changes, but coming from an Irish background and a Cherokee background, where basically both sides, our background was destroyed, the idea that you could translate this for 5,000 years and that this tradition could be held intact by written and known knowledge. So that's why I find it so interesting and fascinating that we have this opportunity. So the next part of this that I'd like to talk about is, you know, basically what you're doing now, and what do you have, what's going on. I know you've both kind of touched on it, but I'd like you to speak a little bit more. Rachel, I'm going to let you start, and I'm going to change the presenter so that it'll record you, and so that you can tell us, you know, where's this taking you now? How is this changing? Where do you see it going? By the way, I got to ask you something before I go away. You're going to Prague.
Yeah.
You're Jewish.
Yeah.
You do have the Golem of Prague in your book, right?
Well, yeah, the Golem is mentioned. You can't have a book about Prague and not have a mention there. But speaking of dreams, I've had so many dreams and so many mystical experiences with Prague. But one of them was that there was an underground mikveh there in my dream. And I went and spoke with one of the scholars from the Jewish Museum there. And it actually turns out that there were, and I had no idea. So it was really something that just transferred through a dream, and it was something as I was writing, that there would be this kind of hidden mikveh under the ground. So there is something about Prague that's very, very mystical to me. So there have been many experiences like that, but I just also am so responding to what Jill was talking about, that through line of not having to feel separate from our ancient sisters. When I went to Egypt in 2012 with our women's group, I never felt closer to my Jewish identity in an interesting kind of way, and it's so interesting to hear Jill talk about that. I've never been able to have that discussion with anyone. I treat a lot of Orthodox patients. They feel very safe in my space. They feel very embraced by the kind of female space that it is. So I've always had this feeling that there must run very deep in that tradition a feeling of women healing each other, a feeling of a kind of healing temple. And when we were there, our guide, Sohaila, who's guided us many times, was very careful to show us in the hieroglyphs very interesting similarities between things like, Moses and the bulrush, Horus and the bulrush, these kinds of things she would always point out to us. And so I felt this kind of deep, connection to that place, even if there was an exodus from there, that somehow there was a connection back to Egypt, and that even the hieroglyphic language, was somehow connected. So I just wanted to respond to that. In terms of what I'm doing now, I have a very regular kind of life of going to the office every day, going to the clinic, and I serve families. I'm now working quite commonly with the grandmother, the mother, and the babies. So I'm treating 3 generations, and that is just such a blessing and a beautiful experience to actually be practicing medicine in a way where it's not the 5-minute visit. It's really, my normal office visit with an adult is an hour and a half each time. My normal time with a child is an hour. So I do sand play with the children. We do acupuncture with the children. The year of Sandy, my cat was in the clinic, so she was functioning as a therapy cat, so it's really a very family-oriented space and a family-oriented experience. And although I'm using many different modalities, I would say that probably counseling and trying to work on bringing people into a deeper understanding of their constitutions and how to harmonize with their particular lifestyles is probably the deepest part of the work, trying to foster change and adapt to everybody's varying dietary traditions and medical traditions. So it's not uncommon to be treating people who are also undergoing a lot of Western medicine at the same time. It's not just a practice where people are, say, only taking a homeopathic remedy and then not doing anything else for a year or something like that. It's a very, I'm constantly having to integrate many, many threads of medicine. So I feel, in a way, I think Ione has said it before, like an alchemist, that there's very, in some deep tradition of alchemy, and sort of choosing with each patient what substance they could encounter that could maybe help them go through a catalyzation or a transformation, not based on some judgment of mine of what they need, but really what they come to me, what they're bringing to me, whether that means they want to have a child, or they want to come into their creativity, or they have a chronic illness. So it's very much a daily work. And I also, relate to what you said, Gloria, being a young child and growing up in Los Angeles. I remember being like 11 and trying to turn a boy into a rabbit from some, spell book that we'd come across in some Wiccan, store. So there's also that generation of sort of growing up in the 60s and 70s, and I was very much, and I wrote about this in my essay in Ione's book, Spellbreaking, very much influenced by I worked in a women's clinic for many years as a young woman, very, very influenced by Our Bodies, Ourselves. So that's very much in my tradition too. It's just runs very deep inside me, because it was that moment of feminism where we were, really, I was in this clinic just being completely, transformed by this very powerful clan of nurse practitioners and budding midwives who were delivering babies outside the law, and, so that there was a whole kind of medical tradition that I was encountering as a young woman wanting to be pre-med, and somehow some experiences inside of that took me out of medicine because I was so disillusioned by what it was going to mean to go to medical school. So I dropped away from it and circled back into it later through the Oriental medicine, and then, you know, always having that feminist, you know, model of healing inside me from those years in the feminist health clinic in LA that I worked in, which was really quite an adventure.
Well, thank you very much for that. And now I'm going to switch presenters again so we can get this recorded for people. And Rabbi Jill, if you would tell us a little bit, you've got such a varied life going on right now. I mean, it's almost like you're doing two things at once.
Well, yes and no. I'm training rabbis and I'm training priestesses, you know, which is really not that different. It's a little bit different. And of course, I'm also mothering and I'm also writing, so I do a lot of things, but they feel very much like the same thing. What I've been very blessed, and both as an educator of rabbis and cantors, and as the co-founder of the Kohenet Hebrew Priestess Institute, that the last generations have really done a great deal of research. I mean, I know even there are folks on the call tonight, lots of Jewish scholars and ritualists and teachers and shamans and priestesses who have been sort of combing history for interesting and powerful fragments of information about, what the underground mystical tradition might have been doing and what women might have been doing. So what we try to do at the Kohenet Institute is to really bring a contemporary ritual practice into combination with ancient practices and medieval practices that we're able to learn about. So, for example, in the upcoming retreat, we'll be doing dream work. We'll be talking about the dream work that it happens in the Bible, and that there were dream shrines in ancient Israel that we know about. We'll be talking about the way the Talmud interprets dreams. We'll be looking at the women dream interpreters of Sfat in the 17th century, who were helping to interpret the dreams of the great Kabbalists. We know about them only because one of the great Kabbalists kept a diary. That's why we know about these women. So sometimes you get lucky, you have a little bit of a historical snippet. So we'll be bringing that practice into the present together and doing Dream Circle. We'll be looking at the prophetess as an archetype, and how did women do prophecy in the ancient Near East? They used the drum, right? They used dance, they used poetry. And we'll be looking at those practices. We'll be looking at how women did oil divination, Jewish women in the Middle Ages. So we'll be looking at prophecy using visual aids. How do people go on spiritual journey? How have Jews done it? How have other people done it? And what are our tools for spiritual journey in the present? So that's some of what we do. It's very exciting to see what our graduates do. They go off and they run women's circles, or they run interfaith circles, or they go to rabbinical school, or they do healing work, or they're artists. It's very, very, or some of them are midwives. It's very exciting for us to see that they're doing this incredible work and they're spreading this teaching. And one of the other things that we look at is the different ways that the divine feminine has manifested, because priestesses and the divine feminine aren't connected all the time in all cultures, but they are, of course, many of us feel that they are connected. So one of the things that we do is we pray in the feminine a lot to give ourselves the experience of addressing God in the feminine, right? In Hebrew and English, right? We use goddess, but we also use traditional Hebrew names for the divine feminine. And we look at how have Jews named the divine feminine in generations past. Or we look at the Bible and the woman of wisdom in the book of Proverbs, who's clearly a divine or semi-divine figure, right? She's described as the tree of life. We look at the Talmud and how the Talmud talks about Shekhinah weeping over the temple. We look at the Kabbalah and we look at how they talk about the divine bride and the divine mother. We look at the Hasidic tradition and how they talk about the Shekhinah as the totality of the earth and its experiences. And then we talk about what modern feminists have said about, how do we understand Shekhinah, which means divine presence, right, and is traditionally feminine in Jewish tradition. How do we understand that today? What are our experiences? How do we choose to accept or not to accept the traditions that we encounter. So that's very exciting work and very personal work, and it's wonderful to do it in the community. So that's some of what I do, and I also do some of it with rabbis and cantors when I educate them, which is quite radical. But I'm doing some of this work with them as well, which is very exciting to me, and makes me feel like the future has potential for integration.
The school you teach, is it of a particular type of Judaism, I mean, Orthodox, conservative, or is it just go across all barriers?
The rabbinical school where I teach is called the Academy for Jewish Religion, and it's a pluralistic rabbinical school, which means that they are interested in a wide variety of kinds of Judaism, which is one of the reasons I can teach there, right? Because I don't fit into boxes very well. But the place where we teach at the Kohenet Hebrew Priestess Institute, Isabel Friedman Jewish Retreat Center, which is a wonderful hotbed of creative, sustainable Jewish life. They have a running farm. They have one of our students is the director of Earth-Based Spirituality at this retreat center, which is really quite extraordinary. So there's another of my students is teaching a movements and body seminar there. I'm often there with my partner on Jewish holidays, on the harvest holidays. We did a labyrinth for the Shavuot, which is the holiday of Revelation this spring. We did a midnight labyrinth to represent the climbing of Mount Sinai, and it was fabulous. I mean, it's so rich, and it's so embodied, and it's so flavorful, to begin to think about the embodied earth-based shamanic qualities of this tradition. And it's, I love what I do. I just love what I do.
Well, it's obvious that you both love what you do. So I'm going to, let me switch this back here a second. So Rachel, I've asked that you bring something to the audience tonight. Did you have anything that you particularly wanted to present, or anything that you were wanting to discuss? I mean, basically, I want this to be a summer school for priestesses. I want them to think about how it is that they are a priestess. I want them to think about how they're going to go forward. So not just meeting us, although meeting you is a tremendous thing, and the opportunity. I mean, I think we've all now decided we want to go to the Kohenet Institute.
I want Rachel to give a class.
Oh, great! I would love to. I would love to.
And
I was thinking about that concept in the book of the toolkit. The priestess toolkit. It's one of the sections in the book, and I do think that for all budding priestesses and women who begin to do this work, that it is so important to understand that our bodies are part of our vehicle. And I think that it was brought up the other night. I can't remember if it was you, Gloria, or one of the women was talking about how the concept, maybe it was Ione even, the concept of self-care. And I think that this is something that it's just, we can't be sort of devoted enough to that concept, because I think that all of us, as we are able to rely on the physical vehicle as a way to transmit our work in the world, the more that we can feel harmonized with our bodies, the spirit can pour through and move out in just deeper ways. I think it's not that if there are physical challenges that we can't also do our work, but I do think that women have sometimes a hard time asking for support for their bodies. They're so used to everybody else relying on their body, nursing and birthing and caretaking and elders, and so there's a lot of, in Chinese medicine there's a saying of 10 women, 9 will be deficient. Why? Because as soon as we build a little chi, we're giving it right back out again. And I certainly see that in my practice. So I think if I can give one concept, it would be the concept of cultivation. And that's something that's so beautifully in Oriental medicine, this idea that we have a little cauldron inside us, and that it is sort of bubbling, and that it's sort of our possibility to cultivate energy on a continuous basis. So, of course, we're cultivating through our spiritual alchemy, but when that can meet our, lifestyle and our nutrition and our capacity for rest, Ione very often teaches that being, just being, is the primary sort of role of the priestess. And I do feel that in my practice, when I can mirror that to women, especially when they're in burnout, that it really is okay just to have some time to be, just to have, I think Pema Chodron said that you can always add space to any situation. So I think that we're in a kind of chronic lack of space in our lives. And so it's if I can pass on one thing, it would be to take more space and to allow that being to have time to cultivate. And I think that very often when I work with women, they know what foods give them power. They know what foods drain them away. They know what they need to be doing very often. And I try also to get people back to their sort of lineage, because I find so much nutritionally that it's very often, if we go back to that sort of DNA of ours, that we can do a lot by just giving the nourishment that our ancestors had. So much of our nourishment is being really, destroyed in these GMOs and chemicals. I mean, I can never forget a single day that I'm practicing that my patient is also in a soup of, chemicals and pollution and, Fukushima disaster and, I mean, even to have gone through Sandy here, in my own little neighborhood, and that moment of the impact of the storm and all the aftermath and all of the pollution that caused, it's just, none of us are really outside of the multiplying ecological disasters. And, the woman who I love very much, Guji Cook, she's a Native American midwife. She said that in Native American tradition, you could not become a midwife unless you could prove that you could keep a crop of corn going for 7 generations. And so I feel that way also, that we have to sort of, begin to help the women to nourish themselves, to nourish their children, to nourish their grandchildren, to actually just hold on to our connection to the planet if we have a chance, There's never been a more serious moment.
Yeah, I think I saw a number recently that every day we breathe, eat, ingest, or somehow come in contact with 7,200 different chemicals, which we have no idea what the long-term effect is on the human body.
Yes, and it's crossing the placental barrier, and it's in our milk now, so it's really, I mean, if there could be some, radical, coming together of all of us, these would be 2 huge issues that cross every culture and every, our breast milk is really being, just completely contaminated by, I think they were measuring what was in the breast milk and placentas of women, things like when they grasp the steering wheel of a car, there's formaldehyde in that plastic, and that's passing into the breast milk. They've done these studies where they've just taken the cord blood before the babies even had their first breath, and already the baby has been, just exposed to at least 90 different chemicals. This was research done by the Rachel Carson Foundation. In our water now, there's so much, like people, every time you pee, every time that if you're on birth control pill, or you're on taking aspirin, or you're on chemotherapy, or all of that's going into our groundwaters. And this is the first time that, we haven't even been able to test for this yet, so we're all in this sort of soup. And I feel that what I'm loving that I'm seeing in the younger women who I'm treating now is that they're very acutely aware of this, and that they are coming out of a sort of corporate financial structure and making connections to each other and to land, you know, and trying to work with farmers and work with you know, different kinds of conscientious food growers, so that their children are, you know, trying to have access to foods that are unpolluted. And I'm seeing this in many of my different communities. It's kind of cutting across, you know, a lot of different diversities. So I feel that this is also something, you know, if I could bring to the table, would just be to get active locally, support local farmers, you know, and try and just have, you know, ecological awareness, because we are the earth. And, you know, the essay that I wrote in Ione's book is called Earth's Body, Myself, which is sort of a pun on our bodies, ourselves, because that's how I feel the next kind of movement is really meditating on and understanding that we as women are closer to that than I feel that the patriarchy could ever be. And it's part of gaining back our power to have, you know, connection to land. I was very moved by Mary Moonbow and her just commitment to live so authentically in that way, and what she's doing, you know, it was very interesting to me.
Yeah, we have some fabulous women that are going to be on this show. In fact, several of them are listening to us now, and we've as the show goes on, I think it's just going to get richer and richer, because people will have the opportunity to hear all these different opinions and all these different ways of being in the world, and all of them are valid ways of being a priestess. You know, I began my day today at an emergency, handling an emergency in an ER, and moved on from that to dealing with someone who's having some problems locally, and, you know, dealing with technology. Sometimes that's part of being a priestess. So, Rabbi Hammer, I'd like to hear what you have to say on this subject, or what you'd like to offer to our audience as a way of being, or an offering, or whatever it is that you want to offer.
Okay. Well, first I want to say how very moved I am by what Rachel said, and how important I think that is, and that really nothing any of us can say is more important than the call to be aware of what's happening to our earth, and to change it, and to know our deep interdependence with you know, with our planet and our cosmos. So I really want to lend my support and my you know, and my love and appreciation to everyone who's working to make that consciousness a reality. And having said that, I want to say something about the importance I see in our generation of reclaiming mythic play. That there is a way that in our era we have lost a little bit of we've lost the gift of ritual. And losing the gift of ritual means losing the gift of being to identify with the mythic journey, right? To feel in ourselves the movement of Persephone, right? What does it mean to go underground? What does it mean to be in the underworld? You know, the myth of the Shabbat bride, right? What does it mean to be the bride of the divine? Like, those roles are places where we can become larger than we are, where we can have the imagination to expand our lives. And because our society often doesn't value ritual, or sees ritual as something that has to be done in a very rote way, we lose that ability to play. And I feel like one of my callings as a priestess is to invite people into story in a way that can be transformative and healing for us. And I loved Rachel's word that she sees herself as an alchemist. Right? There's a way that stories provide a kind of alchemy for us. We take them in, right, and then they change something. You know, we take in the story of, you know, Sleeping Beauty, and we think about, well, what does it mean to fall asleep, right? And how do we wake up, right? And what are the messages about who we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to be asleep and how do we wake up, right? That, you know, when you know, Jacob's looking at a ladder, you know, between heaven and earth, or when Ruth is gathering the grain, right? What are those images supposed to do in us? How are they supposed to heal us? I feel that that's part of my priestesshood, is to bring out those healing stories, right, and see what they do for us. So I guess as an example of that, I opened to the book of Proverbs, which is a book in the Bible that not everybody may be familiar with. It's not very commonly read. But it is a book where wisdom speaks, and she is woman.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite unusual in the Bible to find a character, and really a mythic character speaking. And it's very unclear when she speaks who's speaking, because she's not God, but she's not a person. Right? So it's the authors be very mysterious with us about who is this woman. So at one point she talks about where she comes from. And this is what she says, and I'm reading it because for me it's a very playful image. And so I want to invite those folks who are listening to maybe go into your meditative space as you hear these words. Sort of go into a space of creative imagination. So it says, "The Eternal created me at the beginning of his path, as the first of the works of old. In the distant past, at the beginning of the world, I was made. In the beginning, at the origins of earth, before there were deeps, I was born. Before there were fountains, rich in water. Before the foundations of the mountain were sunk, and before the hills, I was born. When the Eternal had not yet made the earth and the fields, or the first lumps of clay, I was there. When God set the heavens into place and fixed the horizon upon the deep, when the heavens above were made firm and the fountains of the deep gushed forth, I was with the Eternal as a nursling, or artist, or confidant, a source of delight every day, rejoicing before the divine at all times, playing with the globe of the world, and finding delight with humankind." So what I love about this text is the sense that wisdom is there at the very beginning. She's ancient, right? She's old. She was the first witness to creation. Now, of course, since this is a biblical text, in another text she might be the creatrix, right? Here she's the witness to creation. But she is there, and she is described as this ancient creature, but she's also a little girl. Right? She's playing at God's feet. Right? She has the globe of the world, and she's playing with it like a ball. Right? She's delighting in human beings. And so I love this image because it's an image of woman as, you know, as present at the origin of the world. And so really it's hinting at the image of woman as creatrix. But I love this image, and I want to invite people to just close your eyes for a minute and imagine yourself playing with a ball. And go into that little girl self. And now imagine that the ball that you're playing with is the cosmos. Right? Is the planet or the galaxies or however you imagine it. And now you're one with the goddess, and you are the child who is playing with the world, and the divine play is creation and change and shift and transformation. And all that is happening through you if you play. And as you come back, I want to invite you to take one feeling from this sense, from the play. What are you feeling as you play? Feel the joy or the laughter or the sorrow or whatever it is that you feel as you watch that ball of the cosmos bounce in your hand.
Lovely. I love the idea of and I'm also a great fan of the show Cosmos, where they're now talking about basically the same thing, but from a different point of view, and how the cosmos is so much more than we can imagine. That our little brains just don't have the ability to imagine how incredible this is, to be able to look at the whole thing and to be able to stand outside the cosmos and say, that looks like a nice planet. Why don't we put some people over there?
I really believe that the divine plays with the cosmos and experiences the cosmos through us. So for me, it's just so powerful to think of even the children, right? The children of our planet are the hands of the divine.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I think so too. Well, I really want to thank you both for being here tonight, and I also want to acknowledge those that are here and find out if any of them would like to ask any questions. Now is your time. If you are interested, you can actually raise your hand. You just click on the hand and your hand will go up. And let's see, somebody's hand is up. Andrea Maurice, let me unmute you and let you ask a question. Andrea, you're unmuted. Go ahead. Can you speak? Okay, I'm not sure. She's not coming through. Andrea?
She might have to unmute herself.
You have to, well, I don't think so. She should be unmuted. But I'm acknowledged. Let's see who else we have here. Someone else has a question. Diane, do you have a question?
Yes, I don't know if I can be heard. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I would just love what you're saying. This is so wonderful, and I wanted to ask about your everyday and how you utilize altars, or how you connect on a daily basis, because then we just have to go out and be in that world. So how is it to stay and connected? And do you use altars?
Okay, so who would you like to ask that of?
Either, both.
All right.
I'd like to address that.
Rachel, you want to take that one at first?
I see my whole clinic as a kind of sacred space, and so the maintaining of the energy there. There are little altars everywhere in the clinic, and some of them are specific and some of them are not. So it's interesting actually when I encounter, for example, my Orthodox patients, they want to know if they see Tara hanging in the office, a Tibetan, deity, whether or not I worship her. And so that's always a tricky question, because I feel that I really take it more as a way of that I want to embody her, not that I want to just worship her. So I try to explain that I don't see her as a deity outside of myself that I worship, but I see her as having qualities that I aspire to merging with. And so there are various altars like that around the office, and then there are things like shelves of small toys for the sand play that I do with the children that have all kinds of different qualities, and some of them are from story archetypes. There's a little mummy there from Egypt. There are monsters, dinosaurs. So you try on the sand play shelves to have just about everything in the world there, so that the child can relate to it. And so I see that as an altar to the children. It's giving them the feeling that they are welcome there, that their stories are welcome there, and that they can, as Jill was talking about, play, that there can be a sense that we can play in the office as well. So that's how how I see it. And then, of course, the herbs are there too. You know, bottles of herbs, jars of herbs, bags of herbs. So those, in a way, also are for me a kind of altar, in the sense that I have to tend that and tend to them constantly and keep them in stock and keep them, you know, moving. And I have a sacred feeling toward giving them to my patients because of that earth connection.
So, Rabbi Hammer, how would you answer that question?
Well, I do keep altars in my house. It's actually, for me, part of my priestess practice to connect to the divine through an altar, which I see as a kind of frame space for the connection between heaven and earth. And the altar is a kind of patterning or a way of representing in the physical world, right, what it means to be connected, right, what it means for the worlds to be connected. The biggest altars I make are the most elaborate ones are when I'm in community. The Kohenet community always co-creates an altar, and I do it often when I'm teaching the class as well. My primary personal practice at this point in my life is a dream practice. I see my dreams also as a way that the world of the archetypes is speaking to me. And so I write down my dreams and I engage in sharing them when it feels like a dream needs interpretation with the community. So that's really my primary practice. And I also go to prayer regularly. I have a number of traditional Jewish practices around prayer and synagogue as well. I think it's very important to have a practice that, because my goal is to embody the things that I would most want to be in my daily life, and that's, as we all know, not always so easy. So spiritual practice is one way of keeping myself honest, right, around whether I'm living as I would wish to or as I would want others to.
Great answer, and thank you very much. So, Susan Weiland, can you speak?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, thank you. By the way, it's Wayland, but that's all right.
All right, I'm sorry.
Everybody gets it wrong. My question is for Rabbi Jill. You were reading to us from the book of Proverbs. What chapter?
Oh, that's chapter 8.
Thank you. That's all. That's the only. I'm going to go read it later.
Fabulous. You should read chapter 3 too and chapter 9.
You know, I've read it before, but I need to read it again.
All right, enjoy it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My grandmother used the book of Proverbs for bibliomancy. And she believed that, let's see, Proverbs 30 is the description of a woman, and Proverbs 20, I believe, is the description of the man, and both of them are 31 verses long. So the day that you are born is that verse. And Proverbs 30:26 is, she opens her mouth with wisdom, and the law is upon her tongue. And that's my birthday note. And that's what I was raised with, to believe that that was my proverb, that and I had to live up to that. So, and she always used the Proverbs, which she used the whole Bible for bibliomancy, but she particularly liked the book of Proverbs for it. And she would just open the book, and wherever her finger landed, that was the answer. So, Aaron Johnson, can you speak? I've unmuted you. If you can speak, if you can unmute yourself. We have to work both ways. Aaron? There you are. Speak up. Hello? Okay, you're not coming through, hon.
Yeah, I know. I thought I could type these questions.
Oh, now you're doing it.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, brilliant. I had no idea I could be heard on this because it's headphones that don't have a mic. So
Yeah.
I don't even know if you're hearing me, but it's brilliant that you're hearing me.
Yes.
I was typing questions in the type bar, and I was hoping that you were getting the question that way. So now that you can hear me, my question is for Rabbi Jill. I wondered, with your dreams and your dream work that you do you engage with your ancestors in any of that work?
Yes. One of the pieces of earth-based tradition that my community is reclaiming is a deep relationship with the ancestors. Not that hasn't been the case. I mean, if you look at Eastern European Jewish practice, particularly folk practice, they had the practice of on Yom Kippur, before Yom Kippur, making candles. Each one represented a particular ancestor and family, and those candles were used throughout the year as a way of connecting the ancestors to the family. So that's, that was already an important piece, though in some ways in these generations it's been lost. Yes, I consider my ancestors to be an important source of information. For me, the ancestor piece is really complicated. I come from a Jewish family. I'm adopted. I do not have Jewish ancestry. I have Celtic ancestry, so that whole thing happens sometimes, and it's my parents come from very different. My parents, who I was raised with, come from very different places in terms of their own origin. My mother is a convert to Judaism. My father comes from the Eastern European Galicia area. So, my ancestors are a little complicated. So sometimes I tend to want to go straight to the source, because if I start talking to ancestors, I'm gonna, I never know where I'm gonna end up. But yes, that is an important piece of my practice.
No, when you start talking to those Celts, they'll talk forever. Andrea Maurice, I'm going to try one more time to see if we can get you on here. Can you speak up? I can hear me talking on your singing. Okay, sorry about that, Okay, well, anybody else? Let's see. Any other questions? Okay, I think we're out of questions and we're about out of time. I want to honor everybody's time concerns and the fact that these two lovely ladies are, it's 10 o'clock where they are, and I don't know what time it is where you are, but last time we had a woman on from Sao Paulo, so she was, I think, up at midnight. And we frequently have people visiting us from Switzerland, so it's incredible dedication to be up at 2 in the morning listening to us. I want to thank you. And I want to thank everybody who's been here, particularly Rabbi Jill Hammer and Rachel Koenig, I get it right? Yeah. That you've been such an inspiration for us, and you're such an inspiration for those that are coming up, and that for those of us who are living the path. And it's wonderful to know that you're out there. And I'm going to have some offers that Rabbi Hammer has an incredible program that she's going to be offering in the fall, and I'll be sending everybody information on that. It truly is mind-boggling. It's such an incredible program. You're just going to have to take it. That's all I'm going to tell you. It's you're going to get an email on it, and it is basically, it's an online program, so you can take it anywhere you are, but it'll take you through. Rabbi Hammer, would you just describe, just for a minute or two, just your program that you're going to be doing in the fall?
Sure. This is a program called Faces of Shekhinah, which is an exploration of the many different ways that the Divine Feminine has manifested in biblical and later Jewish tradition. So there are 8 classes, and it goes through everything from the biblical through the rabbinic to the Kabbalistic and medieval and modern period. And afterward, you should feel like when someone says there's no Divine Feminine, in the Jewish tradition, you should be able to know what to say. And folks who are interested in the biblical period will get lots of good stuff too.
I think it's fabulous. Like I said, I'll be sending out an email on it, and the reason I'm doing it by email is because my website is still not done. Love those tech geeks. Bless them, bless their hearts. If you ever lived in the South, you know what that means. It means, may you die 1,000 deaths. So Rachel, you're going to be doing your practice, and you have just finished your license. No, you just finished your boards, right?
I just finished a board in endobiogeny. It's a beautiful technique of phytotherapy from France. Beautiful work of Dr. Jean-Claude Lepraz and Durford. And it's a very subtle way of looking at the whole endocrine system holistically, and it's been an incredible training. And then in the fall we'll have our Woman of the Duat retreat through Women's Mysteries, and also Ione and I will be traveling to Brittany, which we have been doing for the past 7 years. To have a beautiful retreat on an island, a very mystical Celtic island in Brittany, to contact the energies there with a beautiful group of women, and other women are welcome to join us. And I think Andrea Goodman will be doing a retreat through the ministry this summer at her house in Maine, so Ruby Throated Spirit. So there'll be a lot of things coming up for women, and women's circles, and also we're part of a dreaming community. So there's a dream circle at my office with women, and we share our dreams and stay in contact through our dreams, which is, as Rabbi Jill said, so important. So yeah, we'll be in the dream field together now. Yeah.
One thing I want for this program is that it be not something that just happens and is over, but it has the opportunity to provide the information to a larger group, a larger community who are interested in being a priestess and what that means, and wherever that means, whether you're a priestess in Western Australia or you're a priestess in downtown New York. I truly want you to know that we care. We do care. We want you to be supported, and we want you to know that we are part of your lineage.
Absolutely.
We are the shoulders you stand upon. So we've walked this path. Throughout this show, I calculated as I was sitting there going, so-and-so has 30 years experience, and this one has 45 years experience. We have over 1,000 years of experience in the women who are speaking in this event. It's incredible. So please come back. We'll be back on Wednesday evening. We will be, let me make sure I have the names right before I screw up like I did Friday. We will have Lorraine Shine and Jade River from the Wisconsin, so another New Yorker will be here. Lorraine will be. And we want to thank you, and thank you all for attending. You're wonderful, you're beautiful, you're gorgeous. Blessings.
Blessed
be.
Thank you so much, Gloria, for bringing us this